para empezar? ¿5 minutos?
Eh,
Ok.
sí, sí, a partir de que entre el David, ¿no?
Perfecto.
Aquí ando cualquier cosa, ¿eh?
Sí, muchas gracias, Ale.
Hello, David. We're gonna give everyone 5 more minutes to join, and we'll start at 5 past 5.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Hello, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us today.
I'm looking forward to it.
Hola, Nora. Hola, Ana.
Hola, querida Paulina, buenas tardes. Hola a todas y todos.
Buenas tardes. Estamos
Hola, buenas tardes.
esperando un momentito para que todos acaben de entrar.
Claro que sí. Gracias.
Les recordamos que pueden poner sus subtítulos para aquellos que lo requieran. Hola, Esteban. Buenas tardes.
Hola Paulina, hola a todos, ¿cómo están?
Otra vez. Bien, gracias. Bueno, pues yo creo que pues para premiar a los que llegaron a tiempo y no perder tiempo para la presentación de David, pues quisiéramos darle la bienvenida a todas y todos. Vamos iniciando. Nada más a mí me gustaría recordarles cuál es el objeto de la comunidad Jalo, ¿no? Que es convocada por Acción Ciudadana frente a la pobreza, pero también por la Alianza Jóvenes con Trabajo Digno y YouWin. Estamos muy interesados. Ari, ¿me puedes ayudar con la presentación? bueno, estamos muy interesados en poder incidir en cambios en las políticas públicas para la inclusión económica de jóvenes oportunidad. Que no se nos olvide esto. Y por eso convocamos a esta comunidad sí, jalo, para poder aprender de aquellas experiencias internacionales que ya han sido probadas, que han tenido éxito y que sabemos que no se pueden, las tenemos que tropicalizar, pero tenemos que aprender sobre aquellos elementos que ya tuvieron en ciertos contextos, pues el éxito y que fueron políticas que se pueden implementar y aquellos elementos que se podrían implementar para fortalecer nuestra exigencia de esta inclusión económica de jóvenes oportunidad. Entonces, el día de hoy, que está muy interesante porque casi no hablamos de ello, casi no hay expertos en México en ello, vamos a hablar sobre un caso en Nigeria de fomento al emprendimiento. Entonces, pues yo los invito a que pongamos pues mucha atención, aprendamos mucho y que hagamos todas las preguntas al final que nos parezcan relevantes. Pues muchísimas gracias. Welcome again, David. Y te dejo la palabra, Sara.
Gracias, Pau. Pues sí, estamos, a ver, rápido una pregunta entre los que estamos aquí, porque quizá podríamos de una vez cambiar a inglés para que David esté como más incluido. ¿Alguien tendría una objeción con que lo hagamos en inglés?
No,
¿No?
Y de cualquier manera están los subtítulos.
Están los subtítulos, pero quizá para David es más fácil si empezamos a integrar en inglés. ¿Están todos bien?
Yo puedo entenderle
¿puedes
bastante
escuchar?
bien, pero no puedo hablar.
Bueno, no,
tanto.
perfecto. Entonces nos seguimos en español y también Liliana, bueno, esa consideración no la habíamos hecho. Liliana iba a comentar en la presentación desde la lógica de la Asociación de Emprendedores de México en inglés, pero si tú te sientes cómodo en español, David, quizá para ella también es más cómodo hacer el comentario en español. ¿Está bien? Súper. Bueno, pues entonces, como decía Paulina, el punto 8 del diagnóstico, que es desarrollar una política de fomento a la economía social y el emprendimiento, es una que en los casos anteriores no habíamos tocado directamente. Y este caso que vamos a escuchar hoy de Nigeria es muy interesante, es muy sui generis como política pública además. Y bueno, pues será David el que nos dé la presentación. David McKenzie es el economista principal en el grupo de investigación sobre desarrollo del Banco Mundial y de la unidad de finanzas y desarrollo del sector privado del mismo Banco Mundial. Él está en Washington y sus temas de investigación incluyen migración, microempresas y metodologías para usar con datos en los países en desarrollo. Entonces, sin más, David, te dejamos la presentación y tienes más o menos 35 minutos. Cuando estemos en el límite, si estamos extendiendo, yo te digo para que hagamos el fin.
Gracias. Yeah, sorry, my speaking is not so good, but hopefully I will. If something's unclear, please ask me. So let me talk about this work that we did in Nigeria on trying to generate high growth entrepreneurs. And this is going to be looking at a business plan competition that was a nationwide competition trying to get youth to not only generate jobs for themselves, but to generate businesses that could create jobs for others as well. And so as a starting point, one of the problems that we see when we look in a lot of developing countries, and I've put up data here from India and Indonesia, as well as for Mexico, is that if you look at the size distribution of firms, it's highly concentrated in very tiny micro firms. And so you can almost not see at all in these histograms any bars for anything apart from at the very bottom. So if you look in Mexico, 90% of all firms here have fewer than 10 workers. It was even more in India and in Indonesia. And even if we zoom in Mexico at the bottom of this panel here at firms that have more than 10 workers, you see maybe 3% have 10 to 20 workers, and then less than 1% have 20 to 30 and so on. So even once we start looking at 10 or more, most of those firms have only 10 to 20. And so trying to generate these firms, and we see this in Africa too, that there's just lots of firms with tiny numbers of workers and hardly any firms that have more workers. And this is very different from developed countries like the USA, where the modal firm has 45 workers. And so the question is, what can we do to get this missing mass of small and medium enterprises, of larger firms, and not just focus all our attention on trying to get even more micro enterprises, which is often what's done with small business training programs or microfinance. And so in Africa, this sense that a lot of the people running small firms are doing it because they don't have anything else to do. And I think we see this in Mexico a bit as well with some of the micro enterprises, that it's a means of survival, it's a means of last resort. It's not really going after an opportunity or an aspiration. And so this idea of entrepreneurship as this attractive career that you want to be getting your best and brightest graduates to go into is not something that historically has been the case. People have looked for safe government jobs. They've looked to get jobs in large corporations, but trying to think that you might start up a business for yourself and as a talented young person, and really that this could be a legitimate career is not something that has been promoted until more recently. And so this is something that I think is gaining attention in many countries, is how do we get youth, especially talented youth with potential, to really think about entrepreneurship as a career that they could pursue, where they could generate these firms that our countries are missing. And so, this is what this work in Nigeria was trying to look at, is trying to answer these key questions. Are there really people out there who have the ability to grow firms that get beyond this 10 worker threshold or more? And if there are those people out there, can we identify them and can public policy help them to overcome these constraints to firm growth? Are there those people that our policies can actually reach, and how might we go about reaching them? And so one way that's been used around the world is these business plan competitions. And so this started up a lot in US business schools. There's been sort of global competitions and organizations like TechnoServe that have done it. The World Bank has been running these programs in a lot of different African countries. So, this map will show you sort of a whole range of countries where there's been programs that have had these business plan competitions. And a typical competition is trying to go after people who, have some education, have some bright ideas, and finance them through these competitions. And the grants that they could be getting for winning these competitions can be relatively large. And so I'm going to talk about a program in Nigeria, but in some of these other countries, you're getting $25,000, $10,000, $30,000, sort of enough to really move beyond that very micro size and start setting up more serious businesses. And so the big question we have is, is this a good idea? Do these programs work? And so lots of concerns get raised. So one is that these programs just get captured politically, that government officials end up giving them to all their friends and relatives, and it doesn't really go to the most innovative firms. Or maybe it just ends up getting support to the businesses who are going to succeed anyway, and it doesn't get them to do anything different. And so there's this difficulty of knowing who should we support in these programs. Maybe we're going to either support firms that aren't going to grow very much. There's this idea governments aren't very good at picking winners, or that we're going to support those who were going to succeed regardless of whether we supported them or not. And so, that's a key concern. And then another issue in terms of knowing whether they work is that it can be quite difficult to learn whether these programs work in many cases, because many of the previous competitions only gave a small number of prizes. They'd have a national competition and maybe they'd give 20 or 50 prizes. And it's very hard to know from such a small number whether it's working or not and who to compare those winners to, because you're explicitly trying to choose the best firms. So those that don't win might not be good comparisons. So this is what we seek to overcome these issues when looking at this business plan competition in Nigeria. So I'm going to talk to you about how this was done in terms of the process, how we can learn from this program, and then what the impacts of winning this program are over the first 5 years in terms of setting up new businesses, creating jobs, becoming more profitable and selling more, and innovation, and sort of what the mechanisms were that allowed these firms to grow. And then this challenge of how do we find the right types of firms to look at, and then conclude and have some discussion about how we think this might apply to Mexico or not apply to Mexico. So this program, YouWin, YouWin was an acronym for Youth Enterprise with Innovation in Nigeria. So it was a program that was launched by the government, by the Ministry of Finance and by the Ministry of Youth Development. And they had this quite generous definition of youth in Nigeria. You could be between 18 and 40 years old. That's 40 years old. That was still considered youth. And you could apply to either create a new business or expand an existing business. So you could say, I've got a great idea. I'd like to apply to this competition to try and set up that idea, to set up that new business. Or you could say, I'm already working, I've got this great business, but I need some, I've got a plan of how I can innovate and grow this further if I get some support. And so this was a launch on a large scale with a ceremony on national TV, lots of advertising through media, through road shows. And so people could apply online for this program. And the prizes for this were very generous. So there was 1,200 prizes of 10 million, up to 10 million naira, which at the time was worth up to $64,000. And so the average firm ended up winning $50,000. And so this is in a country with about a 20th of the GDP per capita of the US. So you can think about this as like winning $1 million in the US if you were to win this competition. So the way the selection works is really trying to narrow down from all the potential youth who are ones that might have what it takes to generate these innovative, creative firms. And so there's 50 million youth in Nigeria that are aged 18 to 40. And so in the first year of this competition, when there was this online application, 24,000 of them applied. This program ran for several years. In the second year, there were 65,000 applying. In the third year, over 100,000 applying. So as this became more widely known, you got more and more youth applying. But I'm going to be looking at the first year of this program. So you're already, really narrowing down those youth at this application stage to people who have what it takes to put together some ideas, apply online, and are really, motivated to try and do something. Now, these 6,000 applicants then had their preliminary ideas scored by experts, and then the top 6,000 out of that 24,000 got selected to go to a 4-day training program where they learned how to write a more detailed business plan, and then they had to submit a more detailed business plan. So again, this is going to select people who could show up and attend 4 days, who are motivated to do that, and then could write these more detailed business plans. Now, these detailed business plans would have all the things you might expect. You have to sort of explain why you've got a great idea, who's your customers going to be, why you're qualified to do this, what your financing strategies are going to be, how you're going to organize your firm, how you're going to market to customers. And then because this program had the goal of increasing employment, what you were going to do if you got this money in terms of what your goals were for employment and what workers you would hire, etc. And so these were scored by experts from both Nigeria as well as from the UK. And so there was these outside experts. This was managed by an independent unit that was separate from the government, who scored this program. And then they selected the top 2,400 out of these people who had submitted this business plans. And so then out of that 2,400, the top ones overall were called national winners. The next few from each region, to make sure each region had winners, were called regional winners. And then amongst the rest, we said, well, all of these have made it through all these stages. It's very hard to tell them apart. So the fairest thing would be to randomly choose the winners amongst the rest. And so we have this group of about 1,800 firms where 720 of them are randomly selected to be winners and 1,100 are selected not to win. And so this random selection, as well as being a fair way of giving all of these 1,800 the same chance, given it's very hard to tell them apart, also provides us a very good way of trying to measure the impact of the program. We have these two groups that are very similar, and then it was just a random draw whether some of them won the business plan or not. And so what I'm going to do for most of my analysis is then compare these ordinary winners who got $50,000 each by winning this competition to this control group who got it to this stage, made it all the way through the semifinal stage, but then were not selected because of this random draw at the end. And so you're going to get a whole range of different business types from across the spectrum here. You're going to get firms who are doing agricultural production, firms doing IT and computer services, firms doing manufacturing. So you're getting a whole range of different activities with people with creative ideas for setting up small and medium enterprises and all sorts of things from cassava and cashew processing to website development and computer training to running some schools or education programs to setting up new ways of generating new products that are maybe new for their area, even if they're sold somewhere else in the country. So then we wanted to see what happened. And so we have a survey where we tried to track these people for several years. And so we have a sample of these groups that I told you about, the winners, this treatment group then who were randomly selected to be winners, and a control group who got to the semifinal stage and who are not winners. And then we did 4 rounds of surveys, so each of the next 3 years, as well as 5 years after they applied, and we're sort of typically able to find 80–85% of these firms and interview them, and then we're observing what's going on in these firms when we visit them in their firms, and then we know the operating status, whether they've closed down or more, for about 90% or more. So we know what's happened to most of these firms for each of the next 5 years after this competition. So what does winning do? So, sorry, I'm going to put up one equation here just to sort of show how we might think about winning this competition and what it might do depending on what's going on in the economy. And so this is a production function where we write output here as a function of 4 things. And so A is typically what we think of as productivity, your ideas, how effective you are at using your inputs to create output. K is capital and L is labor, and then E is your entrepreneurial ability, your entrepreneurship. And so in a world where there's no constraints, where markets are working well and people with good ideas are getting the financing they need, winning this competition should just make the owner richer, but not change their optimal production decisions at all. And so that's the big concern, is that maybe we just end up making people richer, but not actually getting them to do any more production. Now, because this money was paid in tranches, you had to show that you were doing something with this. Maybe that makes you reinvest in your firms in the short run. And so you buy some capital and you hire some workers temporarily, but then that could only have a short-term effect if it wasn't changing anything else in the firm. And so we might expect there to be very short-term effects in that world that disappear. And so for there to be longer-term effects, we need either one of 2 things to happen. We need this program to do more than just give you a grant. So maybe it has to change your entrepreneurial skills through this business plan training, or maybe you get reputation effects and more confidence and more attitudes, and you just become a better entrepreneur somehow from winning this competition. And whether that causes you to hire more labor depends on whether becoming a better entrepreneur allows you to substitute for labor by using more machines or using your own ideas more, or whether you want to hire more labor as a result. Now, the world that we think we're probably in, though, is one with lots of constraints. And so if there's constraints in the capital market and people can't borrow and and there's people with good ideas who can't do what they would like to, then allowing firms to get these grants should get them to increase their capital stock. And so we would expect capital to increase, but it's still not obvious whether we should expect employment to increase, because maybe they're buying machines that are substitutes for workers. And so this is the big unknown, when designing one of these things, is are you actually able to generate jobs for others, or are you in one of these worlds where you're either giving it to people who are not constrained, or they're using it to just substitute for a lot of labor? So let's see what actually happens. So I'm going to show you a set of graphs like this, where the blue is going to be the outcomes for the treatment group, for the ones that won this competition, and then the orange here are the outcomes for the control group, these people that got to the semifinal stage and were randomly chosen not to win. And remember, I said you could apply to be either somebody who's setting up a new firm or somebody who has an existing firm that wants to expand it. So the first thing to note here is that the orange bars are still at about 50%. People who applied to this program were really wanting to be entrepreneurs, and even if they didn't win, half of them ended up setting up a firm. But we see that if you won, you're more likely to be setting up a firm, and that these firms are surviving over the next 5 years. You're still more likely in 2016 to have a firm if you won this competition than if you lost this competition. Similarly, if you were applied as an existing firm, then some of these existing firms will start dying over time, but you're more likely to have those existing firms survive if you win this competition than if you didn't win this competition. So then, sorry, that was what we just looked at. So then, the big question is, what is this doing for employment? Are these firms getting to the stage that we talked about that's very rare, where they're getting to 10 or more workers and they're getting beyond that very micro size, or is this sort of setting up a lot of firms that really don't use a lot of workers? And so this graph shows the likelihood that these new firm applicants have reached this threshold of getting 10 or more workers and how that's varying over time. And so, again, this is incredibly rare. Only 1% of all firms in Nigeria have 10 or more workers. We see that the types of people that this competition attracts, even if they don't win, we're getting about 8% of them have 10 or more workers. So in this orange group, you're getting people with creative ideas, some of whom are able to set up those firms anyway. But winning this competition has a massive effect on your ability to reach this threshold. And so we see, and once they've got all the money in 2013, you're now getting about 35% of those firms getting up to that level where they've got 10 or more workers, something that's really rare in this country compared to if they didn't win. So there's all these people out there that have these great ideas, and then if they could get the right capital, they could set up these firms that could grow to this bigger size, and that again persists. In 2016, the country went into a crisis where the fuel prices were having trouble. The government was running out of money. Things were going badly in the economy. But even in this bad year in 2016, winners are still doing better. And we see that sort of a similar pattern is happening for these firms that applied with existing workers, where again, you're more likely to have reached that threshold if you have won this competition than if you didn't win this competition. So sort of putting that together, we have about 7,000 jobs created in each of the next couple of years from the winners of this competition. So as well as setting up these firms for themselves, there's about 7,000 more workers hired from this. If we look over these, this is expensive, but it's costing about $2,000 per job year over these 5 years to create these jobs. And it's, most of the estimates we have from other types of programs in the literature, it's very expensive and very hard to create jobs. And so this is a relatively cost-effective way of creating jobs, and they're jobs in sort of at least small and medium enterprises and not in really tiny enterprises. And so they're hiring other youth who are now getting new opportunities. So then, what else is going on in these firms? Their profits are going up. They're innovating more. So if we look at a bunch of different types of innovation, are you introducing new products? Are you introducing new processes, new quality control systems? Are you doing something different from everyone else around you, basically? We see that the firms that win this competition are partly using that money to start doing something new. So this is also important. We don't want everyone just copying what everyone else is already doing and just having a lot of cookie cutter firms that are not doing anything innovative or new. This seems to be identifying firms that are going to be innovative. And so, you know, what's not happening here? We don't see that the firms are just, you know, taking this money while they get these tranches, and then as soon as the program ends, they sell off all their capital and they revert back to size. We see that, you know, firms have more workers than they needed to meet all the conditions of the program. They retain these workers when the program is done. So it's not that they're just sort of jumping through hoops to get the money and then getting rid of everything and taking the money when the program is over. It doesn't seem like we're seeing big improvements in other parts of the entrepreneurship. So we measure things like self-efficacy, how confident the owner is in their ability to run their business and their knowledge of different business practices and things like that. We don't see big improvements in that. It doesn't seem like winning this competition in itself is doing these things for you. And we don't see more mentors or more networking or things like that. So these are things that when you're designing one of these programs, you might think about ways to try and increase these aspects of it. But even without these increases, we still see these improvements in employment. We see these this increase in innovation. So the key mechanism here just seems to be really more capital. That when we look at it, what you can do if you don't win this competition, very few of these firms are getting any other sources of formal financing. Less than 5% of the non-winners were getting formal loans or getting equity. There wasn't much informal finance. There was just not much else available. And so it was very hard for you to grow your firm if you didn't win this competition. So the winning firms have more capital than the firms that didn't. And we're sort of estimating these returns to capital of, you know, in the range of 1.5% to 3% per month real returns. So these are monthly real returns. So, you know, 18 to 36% per year or so return to capital. So reasonably high returns to investing in these firms. You know, the firms got a variety of money in the program. And so while this is not completely causal, we see at least an association where those who got given more money amongst the winners also hire more workers and grow more. So this is all looking great so far. So then the final thing I wanted to talk about then is how can we tell which entrepreneurs we should be supporting or which ones are more likely to succeed? And so here, I think one of the key challenges a lot of governments face is getting confused about what their goal should be. And so if your goal is to be an investor or a venture capitalist, you want to predict who's going to have the most growth potential. So you want to invest in Bill Gates, even if your money is not what's making Bill Gates grow as an entrepreneur. Whereas if you're a policymaker, you want to invest in those firms who are going to benefit the most from your money. And so these could be a different set of firms, but both of these could be quite hard to predict. But what I want to argue is that maybe we don't need to worry so much about that. Maybe all we need to do is identify who's not going to succeed, which firms are not going to do very well, and remove the bottom tail of firms. And so I think that's what these business plan competitions end up doing, is it's selecting, getting rid of a lot of the firms that are not going to do very well, and then leaving a pool that's going to do quite well. So, you know, this process of business plan competition has a lot of selection. You have to find out about it. You have to apply online. You have to fill out these plans. You have to show up for training and do more plans. And so if you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of motivation, who can't, you know, put together basics of your business, who is not very detail oriented, you're not going to be able to get through all these steps, and we're going to not have you end up in our finalist pool. But then conditional on getting through all those steps, there's a lot of dispersion in outcomes. You know, some firms here who won end up having 60 workers, and some end up having 10 workers. That some have much more sales than others. But once we've gone through all that screening, it's really hard to predict which firms are going to succeed. So here I have some graphs where I have the business plan score that these experts assigned the firm, and how many workers and how much sales and their chance of still operating 3 years later. And basically what you see is very little relationship conditional on getting to this final round between how the experts thought you would do and how you actually do. Like once you've gone through all this step and we get to these sort of top 2,400 businesses, sort of the top 10% of applicants, it's really hard to tell them apart. And so this is another justification for why it was good to randomly select some of these winners, because everybody sort of seemed reasonably good, and it's very hard to tell which ones were going to be better. But you know, once you put everyone through these rounds, it's very hard to tell who the very best ones are going to be. So let me just sort of conclude here and just say, you know, this is a case here then where this business plan competition was successful at both getting a pool of young people who had great ideas, who could be these high growth firms, and by giving them some capital, accelerating the growth of these firms. They were able to grow bigger firms than they otherwise would have. Now, there's still a lot of design features that I think are unclear, and if you're designing one of these programs, you might want to sort of think through, is the Nigerian program the optimal solution, or should we do these in slightly different ways? You know, do they need 50,000, or would 30,000 be enough, or should we give them 100,000? You know, what's the optimal level of funding? You know, how should we best choose their winners? And you know, should we be giving them grants, or should there be some sort of equity or royalty element where those who succeed end up paying a bit back for the next set of firms to benefit from? But I think, you know, this general idea that there are talented young people out there who could grow these SMEs and who are just lacking the capital to do so is something that's sort of more general that comes through from this competition. So let me stop there, stop sharing my screen, and I'd love to hear your comments and have some discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, David. Bueno, está aquí con nosotros Liliana. Hola, Liliana. Ya lo aprendiste. Y Liliana va a compartir con nosotros, David, una radiografía sobre el estado de las cosas del emprendimiento en México. Y tiene además un par de preguntas específicas para ir aterrizando en... Perdón, no está mi video puesto. En el caso de nuestro país. Te escuchamos, Liliana.
Muchísimas gracias. Y bueno, antes que nada, pues es un honor, es un placer para mí estar aquí compartiendo con ustedes y conociendo pues este caso tan interesante y exitoso de cómo promover el emprendimiento entre personas jóvenes y sobre todo la creación de más y mejores empleos. Yo soy la coordinadora de investigación de la Asociación de Emprendedores de México, que es una de las organizaciones más grandes para agrupar y tratar de representar los intereses de las personas fundadoras de empresas en México desde una perspectiva que busque tener más empresas, más empleo, pero también mejores empresas, empresas que tengan un impacto social significativo y que pues ayuden en general al crecimiento y el desarrollo de nuestro país. En este momento, pues me gustaría compartir con ustedes algunos datos súper relevantes que hemos encontrado nosotros en nuestras investigaciones y que empatan con la construcción de proyectos como el que presentó David y la construcción pues, de proyectos como los que se buscan avanzar. Primeramente, pues recordar que en México perdón, me salió aquí el anuncio de Zoom de que confirme el idioma en el que estoy hablando. Permítanme, bueno, no me va a dejar quitar. En fin, una disculpa por hablar en español, después decir que lo iba a hacer en inglés. Pero bueno, en México la presión por incluir a las personas más jóvenes al emprendimiento incluye el hecho de que estamos viviendo una transición demográfica. La mayoría de las personas fundadoras de empresas tienen actualmente de 35, 45 y la mayoría fundaron sus empresas entre los 25 y los 44. Y claro que hay que, siempre apoyar el emprendimiento en cualquier momento, en cualquier etapa de la vida personal, pero actualmente la población en edad de trabajar supera la población económicamente dependiente y eso es una razón de peso en cuanto, pues tal cual, a estructura económica, estructura demográfica, para aprovechar y impulsar aún más la creación de empresas. En ese contexto, nosotros tenemos pues la radiografía del emprendimiento en México, que es un estudio que se viene realizando desde el 2020, que nos permite identificar el contexto, como bien mencionaban, del emprendimiento a nivel nacional. Observamos que el emprendimiento en México es motivado principalmente por encontrar una oportunidad de negocio rentable y por la búsqueda de crecimiento personal y profesional. Pero si pensamos en lo que podríamos llamar como el emprender por necesidad, como lo mencionaba David en su presentación, que se tiene una necesidad y no necesariamente la oportunidad, en México también 1 de cada 3 emprendedores inició su empresa por no tener trabajo o porque necesita un mayor nivel de ingresos. Entonces, claro que esto nos habla de que si queremos programas o procesos de inclusión de las personas que más lo necesitan, pues el emprendimiento puede ser en muchos casos pues una razón casi de vida o muerte. Además, en nuestros estudios identificamos condiciones estructurales que dificultan emprender, como es la cobertura de la seguridad pública y el acceso a financiamiento, que también me parece muy interesante en el contexto de lo que plantea David, porque nosotros evaluamos en una escala del 1 al 5 el año pasado y la seguridad y el acceso a financiamiento recibieron una calificación de 2 puntos. O sea, de 5 puntos posibles, 2 puntos. Acceso a financiamiento y seguridad pública. Pero por otro lado, eso es como cuando queremos iniciar una empresa. Por otro lado, en cuanto a los problemas de gestión, en la SEM sabemos muy bien que los principales motivos de fracaso de las empresas en México son la falta de conocimiento del mercado, la falta de liquidez y la mala administración. Entonces, por supuesto que programas como el que presentó David de iniciativas que se quieren hacer en este sentido, pues no pueden dejar de lado estos motivos de fracaso. Y pues como de nuevo, como bien se platicó ya, no solo queremos más empresas, sino que queremos mejores empresas que tengan posibilidades para crecer. Los beneficios a los que podemos aspirar en ese sentido, creo yo, es que pues emprender a una edad más temprana también permite emprender más. En México, las empresas fundadas por emprendedores que ya tienen o tuvieron experiencia con una empresa previa, o sea, con otra empresa que está en funcionamiento, tienen ingresos hasta 3 veces más altos. O sea, en México, los emprendedores seriales, les llamamos en ASEM, capitalizan muy bien sus aprendizajes. Entonces, no solo hacen crecer las empresas iniciales, sino que fundan más empresas. Y además, bueno, como dice nuestra directora Juana Ramírez, para el emprendimiento hay que ser optimistas, ¿no? Entonces, nosotros vemos que los problemas de hoy son oportunidades del mañana, porque hay áreas de innovación en la gestión empresarial y no solamente en cuanto a herramientas digitales, que es como un tema que se conversa mucho, ¿no? Sino también sobre transferencia de tecnología y otros elementos que nos ayuden a posicionar a las empresas a nivel local e internacional. No quiero dejar, ya casi termino, pero no quiero dejar de mencionar pues que siempre hay que tener presente la perspectiva de género, porque en la SEM también identificamos que la falta de disponibilidad de tiempo y que existen brechas en el acceso a financiamiento que son brechas de género. Entonces, pues también debemos seguirnos esforzando para que los beneficios en acceso a capital y en el crecimiento de rendimientos también sean inclusivos. Y finalmente, pues para dejar algunas preguntas acá a nuestro maravilloso expositor, pues una de las prioridades de la SEM es lograr una correcta identificación de las necesidades de las y los emprendedores y ya sabemos que pues siempre buscan una buena estrategia de ventas, una buena comunicación, procesos de marketing, procesos de publicidad, pero también sabemos que la mitad de las empresas no conocen programas gubernamentales de apoyo empresarial y 7 de cada 10 empresas en México no ha recibido apoyo de ninguna institución, ya sea pública o privada, que eso también pues nos interpele a todo el ecosistema del emprendimiento. Entonces, en ese sentido, mi primera pregunta, o una de las preguntas que dejaré en el aire, sería, ¿qué otros elementos, además de las estrategias de ventas y de comunicación, no podemos dejar fuera en los programas para el emprendimiento y el crecimiento sostenible de las nuevas empresas? Y por otro lado, 2 preguntas que son más dudas, o sea, en el caso expuesto, que me parece maravilloso y que de seguro, pues como ya se demostró, tuvo un gran éxito, ¿se tuvo alguna consideración sobre procesos para lo que en la SEM llamamos encadenamientos productivos? O sea, que las empresas proveedoras de otras empresas se encadenen con empresas grandes, ¿no? Porque observamos que en México las empresas que sí logran esto también tienen ventas hasta 3 veces más altas. Y finalmente, sí analizaron el potencial del emprendimiento asociado. sea una empresa que no tenga un solo socio, sino que sean más socios, porque en México también pues observamos que pues hay una mayor esperanza de vida, como es esperable en las empresas que tienen más de una persona socia fundadora. Por mi parte, creo que eso sería lo que me gustaría compartir con ustedes. Igual, pues aquí sigo atenta a comentarios, sugerencias y demás.
Did you get those questions, David?
So let me try with a couple, and then you can tell me which ones I lost. So I think, I mean, this was great. Thank you so much for this context and for all these details. So one thing I would say is, in response to a lot of it, is just, I don't think this business plan competition should be the only thing you're doing. It should be part of an ecosystem of support where you have different types of programs for different types of firms. And so in terms of, you know, thinking about some of these firms that are doing it because they have poor management, they have, you know, they lack a lot of other things, they need support with training and things like that. I think, you know, I have a whole other set of agenda, and you'll see a sort of summary paper on my website about our experiences with different types of training programs. I think the interesting thing here is that this business plan competition can help identify a group of firms who the only thing that's holding them back is the lack of finance. And so, you know, I think the discussant, you know, noted all these other issues that firms have with lack of knowledge and poor management and other constraints. And we need different programs to help those types of youth and those types of firms. But we see, you know, here that there are some people where really the main thing is just they need some more capital. And so that's one thing. I think in terms of the supply chains, in terms of being able to get into these supply chains and sell to more and benefit from doing that, I think, you know, that's an area where we don't know as much about how to get new firms into those chains. I think we do see that firms who are doing that tend to become a bit more formal, do better. It's very nice. I'm working in Colombia right now with the IFC, the private sector arm of the bank, to try and get more women into supply chains of large multinationals through a combination of mentoring and training. And so I think we're trying approaches there. And again, I think this is sort of part of, you know, there's no single solution. We need a whole bundle of things to do. But this business plan competition is trying to address sort of a slightly better group of youth who aren't being held back by so many of these other constraints, and who really, you know, might be able to start generating their jobs. The final thing I would note is just in terms of this discussion of that I think I picked up in terms of, you know, entrepreneurs tending to be older and having more experience and things like that. That is something that we see in other countries too. Is that I think, you know, being at the older end of youth makes you're a bit more likely to be successful here too, and that, you know, this idea that having experience working for somebody else and experience in these enterprises may make you better at setting up your own firm in turn, and you can get a lot of on-the-job learning is important. But, you know, that does mean that if you're setting up these programs, you want to set the sort of, you know, make them for 18 to 30 or 18 to 35 and not, you know, set the upper limit too low, because you could be generating a lot of the next generation of youth who are going to be working for that 34, 35-year-old. Hopefully I covered a lot of those questions, but I might have missed some things.
No sé, Liliana, si tienes alguna precisión o quisieras preguntar alguna cosa más a partir de las respuestas de David, o si vemos si hay otras preguntas en la comunidad.
No, por mi parte creo que está claro.
Yo, I have a question, David. You were saying, well, two questions actually. One is Liliana mentioned that even these entrepreneurs that seem competent enough and solid enough to receive financing and be successful at scaling their entrepreneurship, they don't find out about the kind of financing that is available either publicly or privately. And if maybe you could elaborate a little bit on how the communication of this this contest was designed and what were the components that made it successful. That would be one. And then also you did, I mean, we understand that because these entrepreneurs were a bit better, like you said, at applying, and that sort of hints at them having a certain modicum of capabilities. You mentioned that there was clearly, in terms of the results that you did see, there wasn't any clear evidence that receiving the funds was making them more confident. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about the interventions that exist in terms of building up those more like psycho-emotional capabilities? Those would be my two questions.
Great, thank you. So let me start with the communication of it. So this was something that was actually it was a flagship program of the government. It was launched by the president of the country on national TV. There were radio spots that were going around. It was in newspapers. But it is something where even with that, word of mouth sort of builds over time. And so having it for multiple years, as I mentioned, the first year there was 24,000 applications. The third year there was 125,000 applications. And so it's something where, people don't necessarily trust it at first. And then when they hear and see of other winners and see some success stories, they become, more likely to do it and apply in the future. And so, I think we see that. And this was something that we also sort of wondered is having something like this, which has high profile, you get this effect. I don't know in Mexico whether you have the equivalent of Shark Tank in the US, but something like that where you not only are you having the direct effect on the applicants, but by seeing these case studies and seeing entrepreneurship as this cool thing where it's other people start getting ideas and thinking they can do it too. And so you're sort of trying to generate this culture of, this is something that somebody with skills might want to do and not just somebody who has nothing else going for them. So I think that is sort of part of the importance. But other types of financing, I think, is still tricky. And one of the things we've seen is just the need for is that a lot of people just don't think banks or funders are going to be interested at all in funding people like them. And so when there are organizations that are wanting to do that, having very specific information sessions and making clear to, reaching out through these entrepreneurship associations to make clear, look, we really are keen, because many banks don't want to lend to entrepreneurs because, a lot of them fail and a lot of them are young and don't have credit records and things. But if they, and so that's another problem to solve, which this type of competition is. But if there are organizations that do have finance, then reaching out through these things might help. On the confidence and the socio-emotional skills, one of the programs that we've worked with in a number of countries has been working with some psychologists to develop what is called personal initiative training. And so rather than the standard business training that teaches you how to keep accounts and how to do marketing and how to do budgets and things like that, this is really about having this process of being very proactive, looking for new opportunities, trying to differentiate yourself from other people, making sure that tomorrow looks different from today, and having and learning from feedback. And so one of the exercises, for example, is you sit down and you say, what did you do today? And you go through, I opened up my store. I waited for my first customer to arrive. He came and asked for something and I was out of stock. And so I sent him down the street. And then I waited for my usual supplier. and then I got my usual deliveries, and then at the end of the day, I tallied it up, and this is how much I had. And then you go through and say, what could I do at each point in the day so that I'm not just doing the exact same thing tomorrow? How can I make tomorrow look different? And sort of you start trying to think about how can I keep on, doing something so that it's proactive. And so we found this worked for both men and women in a number of countries. We've one of my colleagues, actually, Leonardo Iacovoni, did this with an organization in Mexico as part of with Crea as part of the training there. I've done it in Togo. It's been done in Jamaica. So there's some programs like that are trying to work on those skills as well. Again, I think the types of people that apply for this business plan competition and get through the end are already very proactive, already have a lot of those skills, and so they're sort of not sure. That's not the dimension in which they're lacking, but lots of other entrepreneurs are.
I would have one more question about this random selection. Did you know in the applications whether the people applying were men or women?
So we did, so I should say in this first round, it was only about 16% of the applications were women, and then there was no separate quota for it, but they conditional on applying, they sort of got through it about the same rate. So 16% of the winners ended up being women as well, and so then the government, the second year, made the call only available for women. And so they had a separate year competition where they said only women can apply this year, and they still got 65,000 people applying the second year now that this was much more known. And so, but there were concerns that husbands were applying under their wife's name, or fathers under their daughter's name, or things like that. And so it's not clear that they were all necessarily businesses that were going to be run by women, but there was certainly a lot more women coming forward in that second year. And so I do think, this was not something where there was gender-specific outreach in that first year. We do see that conditional on getting through those rounds, though, that the women are doing just as well as the men, but it's just that there's fewer of them who were at that stage.
Great. I don't know if there's any other question. Liliana, do you have anything else to add, or anyone else here?
Nora.
A ver, ¿en dónde? Puedes leer la pregunta, que no la veo.
Okay. No, Nora quiere participar, levantó la mano.
No veo acá. Sí, Nora.
Buenas tardes.
Ahora creo que estás en mute.
Te escuchamos, Nora.
¿Me escuchan bien?
Sí.
Ahora sí, ya.
Ok, perdón. Sí, yo quería preguntar por el seguimiento que este programa hace a las y los emprendedores. ¿Por cuánto tiempo lo realiza este programa? Y si lo tiene, ¿qué características tiene este programa de seguimiento? Y la otra también preguntar es, ¿qué pasa con estas empresas que generan más empleos? Porque en México lo que sucede es que los emprendimientos, la gran mayoría, surgen en contextos de informalidad. Y entonces, para pasar a un proceso formal, es decir, con pago de impuestos, con seguro social, con una serie de requisitos, pues es una tortura. Y para las personas que van comenzando, y sobre todo si son jóvenes, pues es más difícil aún. Entonces, muchos de estos emprendimientos están en el sector de la informalidad y efectivamente surgen como una necesidad, especialmente donde yo vivo, en contextos rurales, y también sirven para complementar los ingresos de las familias. Entonces, quisiera saber cómo ustedes han abordado estos dos aspectos, seguimiento y el tema de pasar de la informalidad a la formalidad. Gracias.
Great. Yes. So this question. So in Nigeria, the labor system is not as burdensome on firms as it is in Mexico. I mean, and workers are not getting as many benefits, and so there's nothing like IMSS where the workers are very costly to the employers because they're having to pay all the pensions and healthcare and things, and so firms were giving formal contracts to their workers, and their workers then would be paying some income taxes, but not very. It would not be that much, given the amount that they were earning. The firms were formal. Most of these firms were registering with the Commerce Commission. They were formally registered as companies. Again, because when you're getting to that stage of wanting to, you're attracting the types of people who want to expand and grow big businesses, and so that's one of the signs is these competitions are trying to get people who want to go beyond that informal level. And so one of the things we're doing now, we've just got an agreement with the tax authorities in Nigeria, is trying to look and see how much taxes those firms have paid over the last 12 years and see how much the government got back in terms of higher tax revenues from supporting these firms. And so that's something we're in the process of looking at now. But what we do know is we can look in the corporate registry and we see that a lot of these firms were registered, but I think there's that a lot of those labor taxes that are a big issue in Mexico were not such an issue for these firms in Nigeria. But again, I think it's this is something where it's a big struggle, and I've done work in Mexico on formalization. I think it's a big struggle for a 3-4 person firm who's trying to get a bit bigger and starts thinking about these things. What we tend to see is by the time you're getting up to 10, 15, 20 workers, then you've sort of overcome a lot of those things, and maybe some of your workers are still informal, but it's a different scale, and you're more likely to be doing it. So again, I think this is a problem, more of a problem for a different group of entrepreneurs than the type that this competition is focused on.
And there was also the question about how you were monitoring the entrepreneurs.
Yes, and so we I wasn't completely sure about how much the question was sort of about how much time, but I wasn't sure exactly what. Maybe you can refresh me on the question, because in terms of monitoring, they were paid in tranches that were spread out over about 8 months, and so they would have benchmarks they would have to do. They got 4 tranches of the money, and so the first one they got by just sort of submitting some initial paperwork, and then they had to show that they'd spent some of that on the right things, and then they had to show that they were making progress towards hiring some workers, and then meet a sort of benchmark. And pretty much everyone got through all those benchmarks. They weren't very oppressive benchmarks, but it did give, there were some random monitoring visits from the government or from the program authorities to check that they were doing those things. And then from the research point of view, we followed them each year for 3 years, and then we did a 5-year follow-up, and now we're in the process of trying to find them after 12, 13 years.
¿Eso resuelve tu pregunta?
Sí, muchas gracias.
Bueno, creo que son todas las preguntas. La presentación que nos compartió David la vamos a poner en el sitio. We're very, very thankful that you took the time, David. Thank you for listening in Spanish and answering in English. I think that was helpful for a bunch of us. Y invitarles a la siguiente sesión, que va a ser en 2 semanas. La siguiente sesión es presencial y va a estar Alexandra Haas la directora de Oxfam, y justo uno de los temas que volvió a emerger hoy, que tiene que ver con el sistema de cuidados como un problema estructural para generar mejores empleos, poderlos sostener y mejorar la inclusión laboral de los jóvenes, es el tema que vamos a tratar en la intersección justo con, sí, bueno, jóvenes y sistema de cuidados. Entonces les estaremos haciendo llegar la invitación en los próximos días. Muchas gracias, David. Muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí y nos vemos en 15 días.
Gracias.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Hasta luego. Gracias.
Gracias.
Gracias. Thank you, David.
Thanks.